All right. Hello, friends. Welcome to Look and Live. You are now here with Pastor James Devallon.
And I am Darth Vader.
Yeah, we have a reaction video for you today, and we have Freedom Tunes. Darth Vader, do you want to give a little excerpt of what to expect from this one?
So, Freedom Tunes, we're doing the Debunkers, and these guys like to take YouTube videos and tear them apart for their inaccuracies.
That's very interesting. I'm going to check this one out together with you. Hey, this is a 27 minutes video. Let's not waste any more time. Without further ado, let's get into the heart of the message.
I'm a brilliant intellectual.
As am I.
The two of us are sick of dealing with troglodytes, and so we moved into a bomb shelter so we wouldn't catch the stupid.
Now we pass our intelligence on by debunking YouTube videos.
We are
The Debunkers.
In war towns all over the United States, women are called upon to leave their homes and take jobs.
women in the workforce.
Yes, war calls for many horrendous things.
During World War II, nearly 1 in 3 American men went off to war, and women were expected to take their place at work.
Note, they did not take men's place on the battlefield, because even though desperate times called for desperate measures, they still recognized distinct reason-based gender roles were paramount. That women and men can't simply be replaced by one another.
They discover that factory work is usually no more difficult than housework.
No more difficult than housework?
Ah, yes, of course, because 75,000 people were deadly or permanently and totally disabled between 1942 and 1945 in household accidents.
No, wait, those were industrial accidents.
Ah, so industrial work was far more difficult and dangerous for women than household work. Who could have imagined?
Isn't this pretty hot for you?
Well, I hear it gets kind of hot around the kitchen stove, too.
A tough 1940s woman saying something to downplay the safety concerns and difficulty surrounding her job doesn't mean it wasn't difficult or was safe.
Also, please do not compare this brave woman to the working women who lefties promote today.
Hot office? It gets hot around a stove, too.
Air conditioning is sexist.
But the problem was, who was going to watch Rosie the Riveter?
Oh my goodness, these guys were something else.
Oh, yeah. Oh, they're just getting warmed up. Trust me. It gets better, I'm sure.
Air conditioning is sexist. Oh Lord have mercy. That's the... Sorry.
Riveter's kids.
When married women with small
Going to watch Rosie the Riveter's kids.
When married women with small children have to take jobs, everything possible will be done to provide day care for the children.
For 50 cents a day, which would be about $8 now, mothers could leave their kids at a government-funded daycare center.
Wow, well, children being raised by complete strangers at daycare centers was something we did out of sheer necessity at one of the most desperate points in global history, so it's probably a good and cool thing that we should keep doing forever now.
And not to be pedantic, but it's not $8 in today's money. It's closer to 10. Thanks, Joe Biden.
Lunch was included.
Once again, this was part of a war effort, not a feel-good progressive agenda. The nations which established childcare programs were predominantly those involved in the Second World War, the USSR being one of the biggest players.
This was never intended to be a long-term solution. It had to occur because, by and large, the family structure was no longer intact due to fathers leaving the household to fight in the war. It was a crutch for the broken family. Not a better option. Like emergency rations when food runs out. The idea is to return to a nutritious diet as soon as possible.
Unfortunately, to Vox, the goal wasn't to eventually leave the system behind and return to the family, but to leave the family behind and return to this system.
America actually set up universal childcare for working mothers. Canada and other countries did too. around 500,000 American children attended these centers.
What is their source here?
Our figures show the U.S. National Child Care Service cared for only 139,000 children at its peak, despite the large number of mothers in the workforce. If you divide 500,000 by the 2,200 daycare centers, that's 200 kids at each daycare center, which isn't impossible, but seems like a stretch.
But when the war ended,
Things returned to normal and children were raised by their parents again.
Joy is unconfined.
so did the daycare. Families protested, calling for the centers to be permanent, but the federal funding stopped in 1946.
Well, yes, because the war ended.
The need for a total war economy no longer existed. That's not an injustice. It's a good thing. These freaks saw the family structure being subverted.
Yo, these guys are something else. Oh boy.
Yeah, I mean, it's like they saw what they had to do. They did what they needed to do, and when the time was done, they did away with it.
That's right.
What's so hard to understand about that?
Injustice.
It's a temporary solution for a temporary problem. It's not a
Childcare.
permanent solution for a temporary problem.
Doctor says childcare make good citizens. That's so not true. You know, in certain conditions, yes, but it's really not a good thing.
No.
I can tell you, I can testify with our own kids. It was rough.
Yeah.
It's not the best. I mean, we get it in a working society, but boy.
And nowadays, childcare is questionable at best because you don't know who you're leaving with your kids with. And how many times have we heard stories about, these daycare centers indoctrinating children into woke ideology?
It's crazy. It's crazy. Here we are, anyway.
By total warfare, and we're like, oh man, I'm so sad that ended.
Do you think women should have needlessly stayed in those dangerous jobs while their children were raised by someone else? Oh, what am I asking? Of course she does.
What's so insidious about this is that it was at a time where it was still the status quo for a single breadwinner to earn the income for a family. There was absolutely no reason to accommodate mothers leaving the home. It would literally do nothing but take them from their children to line some industrial factory owner's pockets. And you're lamenting that it wasn't made more possible by the post-war government.
And so the US missed that start to begin a climb towards other childcare policies.
I think you missed the start of the video, where it was clear that universal childcare was part of the war effort and not a progressive agenda. It's obsolete unless your goal is to destroy the family.
So I get why you like it, but come on, try to frame this more honestly.
Other countries didn't. Canada had the same protest, and some provinces decided to keep their centers open.
Very foolishly indeed.
That decision started them down a path where it was easy to implement other government-run policies.
Other wonderful policies which usurped the role of the family, the fundamental building block of human civilization.
Exactly. We're supposed to take for granted that this Canadian method of doing things is superior. But for what reason would we ever assume that?
We shouldn't. And in fact, there's good data to help us reach the opposite conclusion. In 1997, Quebec launched full-day, year-round childcare for all kids under the age of 5. The title of its policy brief read, "Children at the Heart of Our Choice," but in French. Gross.
The assumption, of course, was that such a program would give children a leg up while enabling many more mothers to enter the workforce and make that cash money.
But within 10 years, various different analyses proved this was far from true. Social development among children, as indicated by both emotional and behavioral measures, had significantly deteriorated in Quebec relative to the rest of Canada.
10% of a standard deviation lower.
In fact, according to other figures, by age 4.5, extensive hours in daycare predicted negative social outcomes in every area, including social competence, externalizing problems, and adult-child conflict. generally at a rate 3 times higher than other children.
And analyses of self-reported general health and life satisfaction indicated that negative social-emotional outcomes associated with exposure to the daycare program persisted into young adulthood.
And in some cases, these negative effects became even stronger over time, as indicated by a 24% of a standard deviation increase in anxiety, a 19% increase in aggression, and a 13% increase in hyperactivity. The impact on boys and children with the most elevated behavior problems was stronger, especially in measures of hyperactivity and aggression.
This information is largely consistent with findings from the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development's comprehensive evaluation of daycare in the U.S., which found that extensive hours in daycare in early life predicted negative behavioral outcomes throughout development, including in the final assessments done when the children were 15 years old. Family economic status, maternal education, quality of childcare, and caregiver closeness did not moderate these effects.
Perhaps a bit of an info dump, so to put it more briefly, the US did technically miss out, in the same sense that somebody who dodges a bullet does.
Though I am curious to know, what do behavioral problems in Canada look like?
Slightly less polite?
So, how did the US end up here? Here are some of the richest countries in the world. And here's when each of them established a paid maternity leave policy.
If it's what rich people are doing, it must be a good idea.
And a universal childcare policy. And let's throw in paid paternity leave for good measure. In France, they've actually had some form of universal childcare since the 1800s, but formalized the system in 1945.
And you know what they say? Always emulate the people who you had to save in both world wars.
Sweden, considered to have one of the best systems in the world, they were the first to guarantee paid paternity leave, and they've provided full childcare for all children since 1985.
Once again we encounter the myth of the Nordic socialist utopias.
These are never apples to apples comparisons, so let's point out some of the major differences between Sweden and the US.
Sweden has a population which is around 3% of America's, and 87% of their population lives within just 1.5% of the entire land area. They also have a highly centralized government. In other words, even if we wanted to adopt their system, we couldn't. But we shouldn't want to. Here's why.
Sweden has the highest maternal employment rate in the world at 83%. And according to Carolyn Hoagland, Secretary of the European Federation of Parents and Caregivers, quote, "Childcare started as a widening of choices, and now it is seen as the only socially acceptable choice. So the developmental childcare was a way for mothers and fathers to be able to work outside the home to raise GDP. Nearly all children in Sweden are enrolled in preschool starting at 12 to 18 months. The norm to do exactly that has become very strong. Staying at home with your child longer than the norm of about a year is not only difficult financially, but socially as well." She goes on to describe how people who want to stay with their children longer than that are often chastised for not contributing.
The facts are just amazing, Darth Vader. Debunking all these views, the debunkers, well, they're doing exactly what they were meant to be doing. It's great. It's so good to listen to.
Yeah, and this is why I love this particular program. And it's like you don't see this type of thing thrown out there in the mainstream, because if everybody were to know this type of thing, then they'd look at things completely differently.
Yeah, it would change everything.
You know, it would change everybody's perspective on how we look at things as far as like universal health care, universal daycare. This idea that, you know, less than a year into your child's life and you're cutting the umbilical cord, so to speak, and leaving them with some stranger to raise your child. I don't know what parent in the world would want to do that.
Yeah, like they said, it's better for the GDP. It's not really something that is government benefits from these working families.
Yeah,
So they don't mind babysitting your children as long as you're paying more taxes.
yeah. Granted, it's great for the country, but
Hmm.
what about the kids?
Yeah, well,
Is it better for the kids?
that's the
Is it
that's
better
the
for the
question.
citizenship? I
That's the
mean,
question that. Hmm.
and like they said in Canada, no, it's not. I
No.
mean, they said that anger issue, you get anger issues, you
Hmm.
get mental instability issues, things like that nature.
Yeah.
Not to mention the fact that some daycares I've heard about
Mm,
certain
mm,
predators being in.
mm. Well, what do you expect? You know,
You know, so I
unfortunately.
mean, like, just it's such a misconception that daycare is just going to solve everything and let everybody work how they want to work and do what they want to
But
do.
it's also it becomes part of the problem because it enabled these women to not staying in the home. I don't have an issue with women working, but I think removing women from the home has not been a good thing for our society.
Especially
It's,
during the developmental years.
yes, those early years and yeah, so significant. I would say till the age of 6. I will say 1 to 6. I know it's a lot for some women to go through that, especially in today's culture.
At least.
But yeah, but it's at least the first 6 years of that child's life, man. The parents have to be verily invested in them, and but again, look at our culture now. So was it a good idea?
You
I don't
know?
think so. I don't think so. Look at the results.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's keep going.
Because of this wonderfully utopian childcare system, children are enrolled in an early preschool system at 12 to 18 months, and staying home with your child for anything over than that year or so is extremely difficult. That's a hellscape. A creepy, dystopian, bizarre, heartless, icy hellscape.
Gotta love when one of the richest nations in the world prioritizes turning women into an economic unit rather than allowing them to be mothers, and the warm socialist utopians of the US want to encourage us to emulate this.
I want to be clear. Stripping children from their mothers when they're barely a year old isn't a quirky or different policy position we should be open-minded about or even discussing. It's evil. Sweden's childcare system sucks. They should be ashamed. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. And now a quick word from our sponsor. You know, the same kinds of people.
Yeah.
Like what he said there, it just it's like I don't understand how people could not see this and want to emulate something like this, because when all you are to your government is nothing more than a means of production.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what, people are complaining about here in America, is that people have become nothing more than a means of production. Well, Sweden's emulating the very thing that they're asking for. It's like, well, what's the difference?
It's no difference. It's just
You're just asking for a deeper, stronger sense of what you're complaining about.
yeah,
You know,
virtue signaling.
I just, it boggles my mind how people don't see the hypocrisy in what they're asking for and what they're pushing for, that they don't get. Separating mothers from their children is a bad thing. That is just horribly terrible
Yes,
and
it
can
is.
be traumatizing to a child.
It can be.
And not only that, but it can be traumatizing to the parents as well.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there is such a thing as postpartum depression.
True.
You know, and to have to go to a job while going through that, that's got to be horrifying.
It's
You know?
crazy. Mhm.
I mean, that's just I and I don't understand why we want to emulate this. I don't get it. I really don't.
Yeah. We are reaping the consequences.
Making the bogus claims we're debunking happen to write a lot of the news you consume.
How could you avoid the fate of being trapped in their web of misinformation?
With Ground News! Are you fat and ugly and bitter and bad at deciphering media bias?
Ground News can help you solve one of those problems.
It'll make you skinnier? Oh.
Ground News is the world's first news comparison platform. It allows you to sort through different news stories and see how the left reports on things as opposed to the right, making you a fact-checking whiz.
You'll definitely want to check out the blind spot feature. It's an extremely useful tool that shows you specific stories that have gone underreported by the left or right.
Like this story on how 41% of small businesses can't pay rent this month.
If you scroll down a little further, you can see each of the news outlets that have reported on the story, as well as each of the sources' headlines and their political bias rating.
You may be your mother's least favorite child, but at least now you have the opportunity to own her golden boy with facts and logic next time you're home for the holidays.
Speaking of the holidays, Ground News is still running their Black Friday sale. To get 40% off a Vantage subscription, go to ground.news/freedomtunes by December 2nd. That's ground.news/freedomtunes. TOONS.
Now back to the debunking.
You'll notice the US has none of these policies. Technically, there is a 12-week maternity leave policy, it's just not paid. That's up to your employer. And a few states offer preschool, and there are some childcare programs, but they're mostly for low-income families and far from universal.
For whom else should it be? Who on earth would we expect to want to leave their children with complete strangers other than those who are too destitute to have any other option?
Also, this is dishonest framing. While all EU member nations provide support to reduce the cost of childcare for children below school age, they do so to varying degrees and with different policy mixes.
Childcare in the US right now is very fragmented.
Well, in a nation of 330 million people living across 50 states, I don't know what else you would expect it to be.
There are different programs that function for different purposes and often work against each other.
Take a closer look at this chart. After World War II was a popular time for these childcare policies, but so was the 70s.
Ah, yes. When did we ever make clearer decisions as a civilization than directly after World War II and during the 70s?
The early 70s were a time for women's rights.
Women's rights is the PR term the sexual revolution landed on for convincing women to participate in their own debasement.
Equal employment laws had just passed, divorce laws were loosened,
Told ya.
and many countries established universal child.
That was a dagger. That was so on point. It says women's right. I need to hear that again. That was well said. Oh, Lord have mercy.
For women's debasement.
Yeah. It's
The early 70s were a time for women's rights.
Women's rights is the PR term the sexual revolution landed on for convincing women to participate in their own debasement.
exactly.
Right? I mean, come on.
When-
Let's call a spade here.
yeah, I mean, when it started, it sounded like, yeah, women's right. That's what we need.
But
And I'm
you know
sure
what
there
kills
was
me?
some truth into that, but now we seeing the real thing. The beast is out. We see it now.
Going back even to the women's suffrage movement, most women didn't want those rights.
I heard that.
You know why? Because they thought they would have to sign up for the draft, just like men. And they did. So as far as they were concerned, they didn't want those rights.
Mm.
they're like, you know what? We don't want to have to sign up for the draft. So that was the compromise that was made in Congress was, you know what? You don't have to sign up for the draft, but we'll give you the rights anyway.
Wow.
And that's what started the downward slope of feminism.
Here we are today.
And now here we are in third wave feminism, where it's not so much about women's rights as much as we hate men.
Oh yeah, we hate men. Yeah, we went from rights to feelings, and more like now there's the dominant side of it too, where they're trampling on men, and now they completely.
Well, it was women's rights. Then it was the sexual revolution, where women have the right to do whatever they want with their bodies. And now it's we hate men.
Get it. Thank you, ladies. I love my women.
Equal employment laws had just passed, divorce laws were loosened,
Told ya.
and many countries established universal childcare policies.
Because, once again, the West was entrenched in civilization-destroying warfare. This time, the sexual revolution, which left the family destroyed in a way far more drastic and irreversible than any weapon of the Second World War could have. And this time, universal childcare systems were placed there not to pick up the pieces of a broken family structure they were hoping to repair, but to blow a more functioning family structure into millions of little pieces.
It almost happened in the US, too. Almost.
What happened in 1971 is there was obviously a sense that we needed to do something about childcare.
We had to do something about childcare. That thing humans had a perfect method of handling for literally all of history up until that point.
You don't understand. We had to invent the wheel. It had never been invented before.
And Congress actually acted. Both the House and the Senate passed the Comprehensive Child Development Act.
This was a really extraordinary bill because it would have provided universal child care. It would not have been stigmatized in the same way that welfare programs would have been. It would have been available to a much wider group of families.
But then, President Richard Nixon vetoed it.
No one expected the veto, a terrible shock.
If Brexit or 2016 or anything else that they were blindsided by is any indication, no one expected the veto most likely means we didn't expect the veto, but everyone in touch with what the common person wants could have seen it coming a mile away.
His veto message said that this is going to create communal child care. It would Sovietize the American family.
All very good points.
I love how every time anti-communism is given as a reason for doing something, the left responds as if communism literally just never existed and was invented by evil Republicans to have more excuses to be mean. This was during the 1970s. Communism was a pretty significant existential threat. It still is. But it really was then.
Communists were in control of one of the largest nations in the world and had actual nukes.
And they didn't suffer from dementia like today's communist leader who's in charge of a massive nation and has access to nukes.
That language was a response to criticism that he was going soft on communism, like by visiting China.
Here's the part where we don't refute his argument, but try instead to find motivations for him to have made it which have nothing to do with the topic being discussed.
But really,
the right wing began to see this as an encroachment because it could be used potentially by white middle-class families in order to support women leaving the home and going out into.
They're playing the politics again.
Yeah, it's like, what do they not understand about? This is a bad thing. We like the debunker said, we've had a system in place that's worked for thousands of years.
Mm-hmm.
Have they ever heard the phrase, if it ain't broke, don't fix it?
Mm-hmm.
Just because women want to go out and be a bunch of hoes?
Yeah. And now they're taking their jabs at political parties, and they're departing from the talking points. That's the issue that I have. They're having a nice, decent documentary, although it's laced with woke, it's laced with a lot of things in there. But they can't help themselves. Well, it's been political from the beginning anyway. They can't help themselves but to depart from it to talk about, their
How
opponent.
bad Republicans are.
Yeah, they can't. I just like to me, it's like, yo, just stick to the facts. Just tell your story, convince me. But no, they can't do that.
Nope, they
We
got to
got
get their
to-
propaganda in there.
Yeah, we gotta help you hate the other side. It's just gotta help you do that. It's crazy to me.
To the workforce.
Yes, that's what he said. Communism.
Because it could be used potentially by white middle class families in order to support women leaving the home and going out into the workforce.
No, that's not what it could do. That's its express purpose and the entire reason why you support it.
They're not supposed to be working.
No, they aren't. And all of the data make that perfectly clear. Daycare is absolutely horrible for children, but rather than confronting the fact that your reinvention of the wheel does nothing but hurt children, you cling to your outdated egalitarian fantasies and assume the rest of us should take them for granted as well, when they've brought nothing but harm and destruction to the most vulnerable among us.
Exactly.
I think he just cursed. He just cursed them out politically. That was good. I don't want to hear that again.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of finger wagging in there.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. It's like, let me tell you something. I love that. I gotta hear that again. That was good.
Women leaving the home and going out into the workforce.
No, that's not what it could do. That's its express purpose and the entire reason why you support it.
They're not supposed to be working.
No, they aren't. And all of the data make that perfectly clear. Daycare is absolutely horrible for children, but rather than confronting the fact that your reinvention of the wheel does nothing but hurt children, you cling to your outdated egalitarian fantasies and assume the rest of us should take them for granted as well, when they've brought nothing but harm and destruction to the most vulnerable among us.
Exactly. Daycare produces less socially well-adjusted children than homes where they're with their mother. Explain to me why mothers should be out working when we know this is the case, without chortling about how knowing anything about what the data says makes one a retrograde chauvinist.
We do want to make, poor Black and brown indigenous mothers like.
What?
Okay, she's just writing fanfic at this point.
President Nixon, there are zero flaws with daycare. We should universalize it.
Absolutely not. I hate indigenous women too much.
She doesn't have an argument for why daycare is an acceptable place to abandon your child at for the entire day when you have any other option. So not only does she need to resort to calling us sexist for disagreeing with her, she pulls out the big guns and says we're racist too.
Can I ask a genuine question to this woman? If you ever happen to watch this, how many of my policy positions on a day-to-day basis do you think I go about defining based on a hatred for indigenous women? Like, what place in my head do you think that occupies? Do you think I'm like going around hearing about the issues and going, I could pick this side, but then what kind of hatred for indigenous women would I be expressing?
Like, those are the non-deserving kinds of mothers that shouldn't be on welfare. They should be working.
How can she be this obtuse? The conservative argument isn't that black mothers should be working and white ones shouldn't. In fact, it's no argument at all. It's a simple statement of basic fact. Men should provide for their wives and children, and a system which does anything.
It's crazy to me. Like, a lot of Dems cannot have a basic argument without using the race card.
Nope.
Like, there is really no racist in this, but they find a way to insert it anyway. It's just, to me, like, where's the racism at? We're talking about families here.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about basic values. We're talking about saving society, strengthening the family structure. That's all this is about. But instead of acknowledging that,
you in order to strengthen the family structure, you got to look at the race. The race of the family structure is important.
True.
Didn't you get the memo?
It's crazy.
I mean,
I just couldn't understand why she was pulling up the race card. I don't see where that fits in the discussion at all.
because that's how they think. That's their mindset. They're so fixated on everything being about racial inequality and racial injustice and racial this and racial that and blah 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 blah.
It's getting old.
Who cares about race? Is it
old.
good for the family? Is it not good for
Not
the
good for
family?
family.
And does the family benefit from? Does the country benefit from having a healthy family or not?
Simple as that. And the answer will be yes, they benefit greatly. But
like, it's mind-boggling the leaps and bounds these people, the hoops these people, the mental gymnastics these people have to go through to come up with these idiotic answers. Like, and I just don't get it.
It's
and
wild.
Yet you and I sitting here having this discussion would be called racists because we don't agree with them.
A white guy and a black guy talking, that's called racist.
Right? I mean,
give us a break.
For crying out loud, Larry Elder was
No,
called
it's
the
just
blackface of white supremacy.
White supremacists. Oh my goodness.
I mean,
common sense is no longer common.
Common sense guy to the rescue.
Common sense to the rescue. Can we call common sense back into the room, please?
Yes, please invite him back in, please. We need him over here,
goodness.
please.
He done left the room long time ago.
Oh man,
Lord
these people are so diehard, sucked into this belief system that it's hard to have a conversation with them that doesn't involve this. And that's the thing is when you do talk to these people, it's like, okay, no, stop right there. Let's get back on track, back on focus. Race has nothing to do with this. Race has absolutely nothing to do with this.
That's their weapon, though. They can't do without that.
Yeah, well, tough. I'm sorry. That may be your weapon, but guess what? My weapon is truth and facts. And truth and the facts don't bear that race has anything to do with it. I know just as many poor white people as I do poor black people. Yep. So guess what? You can take your
it's not about color,
race and identity politics and all that and stick them where the sun don't shine.
You say shove it. Lord have mercy. All right.
Men should provide for their wives and children, and a system which does anything to usurp that role is a broken one.
She doesn't cite a single source for any of her radical claims, though that shouldn't be a shock, because if she was big into the whole having sources thing, she wouldn't be in favor of daycare in the first place.
No. None of those studies matter, for you see, we've been called racist.
Oh, yes.
Sorry, let me mute myself.
President Nixon, there are 0
policy positions. On a day-to-day basis, do you think I go about fighting based on a hatred for indigenous women? Like, what place in my head do you think that occupies? Do you think I'm, like, going around hearing about the issues and going, I could pick this side, but then what kind of hatred for indigenous women would I be expressing?
Like, those are the non-deserving kinds of mothers that shouldn't be on welfare. They should be working.
How can she be this obtuse? The conservative argument isn't that black mothers should be working and white ones shouldn't. In fact, it's no argument at all. It's a simple statement of basic fact. Men should provide for their wives and children, and a system which does anything to usurp that role is a broken one.
She doesn't cite a single source for any of her radical claims, though that shouldn't be a shock, because if she was big into the whole having sources thing, she wouldn't be in favor of daycare in the first place.
No. None of those studies matter, for you see, we've been called racist.
Ah, yes. I thought I believed daycare was bad because by every metric it leads to worse outcomes for children, but it turns out I just hate those Cherokee women so much.
not to harp on this too much, right? But I love when people say, actually, it was racism, smugly, as if they've, like, proven anything. Look at the way she says that. Like, she's just, like, weaved this grand narrative and surprised us with the plot twist. How smug. You didn't make a point. It's a standard left-wing throat clearing. Everything's racist.
Conservative Phyllis Schlafly led that opposition.
Based.
Women whose husbands have left them or divorced them or whatever have a very hard time. But when you look at these wives who simply want a standard of living higher than their husband is producing, crying around that they want somebody else to pay for the daycare.
Yes, exactly. Literally. That's completely true.
They were organizing against childcare because it would take mothers out of the home.
And it would take children out of the homes as well, correct. A federalized and Huxleyan system of child rearing actually isn't a good thing.
Just as the European countries were starting their child care systems, we were shutting the door.
The day after Nixon vetoes the CDA, he signs into law a bill that created child care tax deductions for middle-class and affluent families.
Yes, to make universal child care less of a necessity by lowering the tax burden for families so more of them could afford to have the mother stay at home. That's an absolutely flawless step in the right direction. Smirking about it doesn't make it a bad idea.
Even if Vox plays cheeky music over her smirking?
Especially.
This creates a two-tiered system. On one hand, you have these tax supports, and then on the other hand, you get these much more stigmatized direct supports for only low-income families.
Yes, because there's nothing wrong with having less money taken from you, but there is something potentially shameful about taking other people's money without their consent if you don't need it, or if it's because of irresponsible decision-making. Most folks are more interested in scrutinizing people who are taking money from them rather than those who are getting to keep more of their own money.
Meanwhile, these countries were able to follow a path from one universal policy to another. Experts call this path dependency. So for these countries, once they established one universal policy, creating others was fairly straightforward.
Yep. Hard to stop a train wreck once it's started.
Where in the US, it's been easier to design policies within the parameters of the existing income-based programs or the tax breaks that Nixon founded.
He set a path where any kind of federal childcare policy would be as underfunded, stigmatized as possible.
Unlike the path you would like to put us down, where husbands supporting their wives and women staying home with their children is as stigmatized as possible.
It's a system that reinforces.
You know, at the heart of their message, they are really asking for another Marxist government type of, socialist approach. That's really what they're begging for.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It
just dawned on me. I'm like, oh my goodness, they just want the government to take over the fathers.
I was waiting for you to figure that out. Like, here, Big Daddy, have my child.
Yeah, that's really what they're saying. All that complaint, all that wording. I'm like, oh, wait a minute. They're really trying to, they're just trying to get rid of the dads and put the government in their stead. Yeah. Duh.
Here, Big Daddy government, take my child, please.
Take my child. Care for my child. And what you do, I go to work and hang out with my girls after work.
I will work for you as long as you take my baby. And then I can go, out with my girlfriends and have fun. And
the government's like, government, it's not the government responsibility, by the way. Can I remind you of that?
Right?
Yeah, it's like
you made it. You take care of
it. Yeah, they can assist you, but you shouldn't depend on them.
No.
No.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. It's crazy.
And deepens inequalities of race, gender, and class.
Incorrect.
Stable families transcend demographic disparity. Racial minorities and married couple households are significantly less likely to live in poverty. That's right. The family unit is so strong as an institution that it mitigates the effects of all the pervasive white supremacy under which we live. It's stronger than racism.
And yet, wanting to preserve the family by reducing financial strain that married couples with many children might experience in the form of tax cuts, and doing anything and everything necessary to keep the family unit contained rather than splitting it up through various child care bureaucracies and places of employment, is merely a tactic of those who hate indigenous women.
It doesn't end up helping so many of our families.
By helping families, she means helping to split them up, by the way.
But just because we're on that path doesn't mean we can't change.
Have mercy.
Just look at the United Kingdom.
From a bird's eye view, these countries are following very similar paths.
Neither continued the daycare centers after World War II. Both had attempted childcare policies in the 70s. The UK's failed attempt was actually led by conservative Margaret Thatcher. But in the 90s, the UK actually shifted and established a universal pre-K program. So what changed?
It's framed as education, not welfare.
As is the system in Sweden, where children are expected to be placed into the system at as early as 12 months, and where mothers are rarely able to stay with their children beyond that first year and a half, and when they are, it's deeply stigmatized.
And so those questions of deservingness aren't applicable in the same way because it's education for all children. It's part-time, it's not as generous, but I think that it is an example of how you can readjust your priorities and change direction.
The U.S. had
Yeah.
And that was part of what brought about Brexit.
Oh, really?
Because a lot of people didn't want that. Like, the majority of the citizens didn't want to have that. They didn't want to hand their children over to the government.
Got it.
So the whole idea that, this is a good thing is a misnomer. It's a red herring.
Yeah.
And then really that was one of the major proponents that people who wanted Brexit went on about. Because I have friends that I play online games with in Brexit, and this is like one of the big things that they talked about was the universal childcare. Like, they're like, we don't want to give our kids up to the government. We're happy the way we are. Like, the husband would go out and work because I play, games at night with the husband and the wife were home, and they're both playing games and stuff. And we'd all play together. And he's like, yeah, I go out, I work during the day. I come home, my wife's waiting at home with me with my kids, and she's got dinner ready for me when I get home. I don't see a problem with that. I have no problem with that. She has no problem with that. We like our lives just the way it is. We don't want that to change.
Yeah.
And if they pass this, then we're going to have to change. We're going to be forced to change. And a lot of people didn't like that. And that's what this whole thing is about, is this whole universal child care, as they call it, is forcing people to change their way of living, which it goes against the natural order of things.
Yeah. Wow. Didn't even think about that. No, I didn't think about it this way. I didn't see the connection with that in Brexit. I didn't see that link. Insightful. And I think that's why these European nations, to a large degree, character and family wise, they're doing much better than we are. They're saving their homes.
To some degree.
Yeah, to some degree.
I mean, there's like, if you actually put them under a microscope, you'll find there's a lot of flaws in a lot of their systems.
Yeah, of course.
Like,
but it seems like they have stronger families than what we've seen in this. Well, it depends on the population as well. So there's a lot to consider.
Yeah, there's a lot of different things going on. Some I would say yes, some I'd say is questionable, and some I'd say well, it's kind of neither here nor there. It's about the same.
Yeah. Yeah. Why we seem to reflect back on each other.
But I mean, really what it boils down to though is this does nothing to help families. This only hurts families, period. And that's what Nixon was trying to prevent. That's one good thing Nixon did, was nix this idea of universal child care, because it's a terrible idea. And when they're talking about the two-tiered system, it's not a two-tiered system. You got the child tax credit. Yes, that's all well and good. We should have. But then you got the welfare state. That's responsible for more poverty in the U.S. than any other system in the U.S. Because you got people who abuse it, you got people who rely on it, you got people who depend on it, and they get caught in that honeypot of a trap, and without the father in the home, and they're scared to get a husband or a father in the home, so they get stuck in that vicious cycle of being stuck on welfare.
Yeah, because if you get the father in the home, his income will be considered, and then you're not going to get all the extra privileges that you have. So it incentivizes a broken home in a sense.
Exactly.
Sad.
So that just leads down the path to this universal child care.
Sounds good, but deadly.
Which even further divides the family unit.
Of course.
So now you're not getting rid of the dad, but you're also getting rid of the kids.
It's crazy. All right.
Readjust your priorities and change direction.
The US had universal childcare once.
And my friend lived in a homeless shelter once. Does it mean that's a preferable alternative to what he can have when his life is on track? Similarly, a nation that isn't engaged in an all-encompassing war effort that forces women into dangerous factory jobs and is able to have normal and healthy functioning family units shouldn't opt instead for state centers where children are separated from their mothers for the majority of the day. In conclusion,
the underlying assumption of this video is that a system of strangers raising other people's children for them so that worker scarcity can be diminished is not only an acceptable thing for a normal, well-adjusted adult to want, but is in fact a preferable alternative to the family.
But all of the data, unsurprisingly, show this to be completely untrue.
Within 5 years of birth, 1/3 of children born to unmarried parents see their father less than once a month and are already showing able to stay with their children beyond that first year and a half, and when they are, it's deeply stigmatized.
And so those questions of deservingness aren't applicable in the same way because it's education for all children. It's part-time, it's not as generous, but I think that it is an example of how you can readjust your priorities and change direction.
The US had universal childcare once.
And my friend lived in a homeless shelter once. Does it mean that's a preferable alternative to what he can have when his life is on track? Similarly, a nation that isn't engaged in an all-encompassing war effort that forces women into dangerous factory jobs and is able to have normal and healthy functioning family units shouldn't opt instead for state centers where children are separated from their mothers for the majority of the day. In conclusion,
the underlying assumption of this video is that a system of strangers raising other people's children for them so that worker scarcity can be diminished is not only an acceptable thing for a normal, well-adjusted adult to want, but is in fact a preferable alternative to the family.
But all of the data, unsurprisingly, show this to be completely untrue.
Within 5 years of birth, 1/3 of children born to unmarried parents see their father less than once a month and are already showing problems in test performance and behavior.
Adolescents whose parents have divorced are more likely to experience injury, accidents, and illness than children from intact families.
Furthermore, stable families transcend demographic disparity. Racial minorities in married couple households are significantly less likely to live in poverty. That's right, meaning the family's the best thing for battling white supremacy.
Families matter more than the state ever will. No government will ever raise a child better than a loving family. And federal funding to child care programs is a crutch. It's a wooden leg to use if somebody has lost theirs. Not something we should all be going to get cosmetic surgery to replace our healthy and functioning legs with.
And almost did again. But with policy, it's never really game over.
Believe me, if those policies usurp the role of the family, it will be.
Yeah, thank you for that one.
You're welcome.
Powerful indeed. Very informative as well. They had my head going, man. Yeah, much more could be said. Well, let me get to that text, and then let me see if I can find it. Here we are. All right. I want to keep it simple. Listen, Father. There it is. You fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in nurture and admonition of the Lord. Here is another thing that's also significant. So the first thing is fathers. You can also add mother to the list. We have a job to do to raise our children instead of the government. Deuteronomy 6. This is actually a practice that even the Jews until today, they listen to this. They apply it. And you wonder why the Jewish families have a lot of strong families? This is actually where the secret is. It's actually in Deuteronomy chapter 6. Even though I have my issues with some of their belief system, but there's something there for us to learn from. Okay, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart. Hear thee, thou shalt keep the statute of thy commandments. Oh, there you go. Yeah, actually, the Jews actually tends to quote this passage. There's a name for it. I forgot what it's called. They quote this passage every Sabbath themselves, and they make it a motto for their family. It says, "O Israel, the Lord thy God is one Lord. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thine heart and with all thy soul and with all thy might. And these words which I command thee this day shall be in thine heart." Here's the secret. "Thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and thou shalt talk of them when thou sittest in thine house, when thou walkest by the way, when thou liest down, when thou risest up. Thou shalt bind them for a sign upon thine hand, and they shall be as frontlet between thine eyes." Listen to this. Thou shalt write them upon the posts of thine house and upon thy gates. So significant. The whole idea is the word of God must be taught to the children. They must be on the walls. Instead of having certain pictures on our wall, scripture must be on our walls. Even some Jews took it literally as well. They were putting these, they actually had little things that they put in front of their foreheads and everything and carried that out as a practice. Even during the times of Jesus called it out, but that wasn't the point. But they took it that far. So they would have scripture literally laying in front of their forehead, and every now and then they will unwrap it and read it and so on and put it back. You might see pictures online about that. But anyway, Satan doesn't like this. Say what you say about the Jews, but he hates this. Parents to have time to teach their children the word of God. The best way to destroy the nation is to destroy the family, and Satan has mastered. Separate them from their families as soon as possible. Get them working, making money, and the children are being raised by whosoever, and the results have only been deadly. This is how you destroy the family, and this is how you destroy society. God saw it coming, and he actually gave us the recipe right there in Deuteronomy chapter 6, but how few are listening. I have 2 sons. Part of the things that I do with them is, especially on Friday, doing Sabbath hour, we is Bible study time. Like on Friday evening, you're never gonna catch me doing certain studies. You might not see me on a live stream. Part of the reason for that is I'm keeping the Sabbath. But my son, especially my 12-year-old, he knows, man. It's like, bro, it's time for Bible study. And he comes with an open heart, and they have to memorize certain scriptures and everything. You know, there's ups and downs with it. I don't overwhelm them, but they are being raised. I'm trying to raise them with the word of God in their hearts. Um, it's great to see, you know, but it's still a challenge because the world is pulling them the other direction. Everything they go on YouTube for 5 minutes is like it's a whole different worldview. I have to be like, what you watching on YouTube? Like, let me see this. Like, nope, you can't have to like these videos in these channels consistently because he needs his little time for himself. Because I can't keep him 24 hours watching him, everything that he's doing. But the world is like consistently trying to pull these children away from us, and we have to fight for them.
And along those lines, I also want to add to it Proverbs 22:6. If you want to pull up my screen real quick.
Go ahead.
Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. This
Nice.
saying that if you train your kids as a family unit when they're young and teach them the word of God as children later in life, even though they may during their life eventually walk away from it and, you know, wander away from it, eventually they will come back.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
No matter what, that word will stick with them and they will come back. Believe me.
Mm-hmm.
I am living proof of that.
Powerful. Powerful. Yeah, thank you for that. Put the word of God in their hearts, and they will return at the appropriate time. All right, thank you so much for listening, guys. God bless you all. I hope you enjoyed this video.
Bye.
Bye.